Okay, I'm going to try and make this as simple as possible to read you into the picture of what you're going to see when you see Paul's meter. This is still more of the backstory about why Paul meters his verse based on Psalm 90 and Isaiah 53. The story really starts in Genesis 5, and I've done a lot of videos on it, but I'm going to try and simplify all that material here. You have to think of time. I don't draw well in paint, okay? You have to think of time like a house. The Bible says your body is a house too. The real you is your soul, not your body. That's why you're not evolved. The real you is immaterial, not material. The body is a house you walk around in. That's in Psalm 139, and when I finish retranslating that psalm, because it's mistranslated in English, you'll see that. David's talking about the house, the building of his house, and how amazed he is that God would bother to build a house for him. Okay? Because, you can't sit there and say to God, hi, I deserve to be here. No matter how good you are, you're not as good as God. That's Romans 4, 1 through 2. And Calvi's kind of got it backwards. It's not that we can't be good or do good. It's that our good isn't good enough. That's why Christ had to pay for us. Our good can't pay for our bad. So he took on sins on the cross. Okay? So you can't sit there and say to God, hi, I deserve to have a house to walk around in. You also can't say to God, hi, I deserve to have the time so that I can have a house to walk around in. Time is like a house for your body, just as your body is a house for your soul. So God grants 490 years at a time as a house for the human race to live. Now, that house has to do something for God. Or it's not just for God to have to sustain the cost of watching you live in your body or in a house of time. Now the question is, what's going to justify it to God? Because He's holy. Alright? And the answer, of course, is Christ is going to pay for sins, and that gives you the ability, okay, because God gives you the ability to ask, to learn, to believe, and then to learn God as a result of believing, because once you believe, you become a spiritual being. Okay, now, most Christians know the verses on that. If you don't know them, just, ask me in the comments and I'll show them to you. Okay? Because I want to keep this short. So the time house is for the human race to grow up, learn to ask questions, learn to believe, and then learn the spiritual life after they believe. And that's the story that God begins telling in Genesis 5. That's what Paul is talking back to in his meter. That's what Psalm 90 was talking back to in its meter. That's what Isaiah 53 was talking back to, specifically about how Messiah would be developed and pay. So this 490 years is the basic unit of time. Somebody has to mature during the 490 years enough to justify the time that God granted. It only has to be one person who matures enough. It can be more than one, but somebody has to mature in knowing God so much that it justifies that time's existence for everybody. So that's the big question mark about time. Now, if somebody does mature enough, there's still a second criterion that has to be met. Okay? And that is, during this little block, which is 70 years, did all those other people who believed in Christ as He was then revealed, because it starts with Adam, did they vote in aggregate, in mass? Did enough of them vote to learn God, even if they didn't mature enough? Did they at least vote to learn? Okay? That's the criterion. And it's a mass vote, not individual. I mean, they're voting as individuals, but it's like how many? Okay, and it doesn't have to be many. It can be only one. but there has to be a vote. So 70 years is granted for the vote. And if there are enough votes, then whoever it was that matured during this time justifies granting another 490 years to the world to live. In other words, this first 490 is contingent on the vote occurring, at which point the second 490 can play. That's the basic rule about time. And that total equals 10,000, 1,050. Okay? And I know that the Greeks kind of knew about this. So, I mean, the evangelism about this rule went out there because Solon makes a comment about it. Solon was a famous Greek guy. He makes a comment about it, about how man's lifetime is 70 years, and the Greek system of counting years was weird. They basically had a bad intercalation system. But he uses the 1050 of their own intercalation to explain this. So they had heard of it. Okay? It's a garbled version that they know, but they had heard of it. And the Jews also know about this. But the Jews today, if you look it up on the internet, they'll think it's just 1,000. Okay? They forgot about the 50. The 50 is their Jubilee right here. This 50 is called Jubilee in the Mosaic Law. It's for harvesting the Gentiles. And when you read Daniel 9, you're supposed to insert that 50-year period between Daniel 9:26 and Daniel 9:27. The Jews all knew to do that. God doesn't mention it in Daniel 9 because it's not Jewish time. It's Gentile time. All right, and as you saw in 10C GGS, 50 of the 54 years is owed to Gentiles, and that's why it was called Jubilee, and that's why it is Gentile time in the Mosaic Law. It's to basically pay back the Gentiles for time that was lost. Okay? Now we're going to go through that in more detail later on, but I just want you to understand these basic numbers. You got the 490. Okay, let's see. Should I use the same color? Let's use some egregious color like pink. I hate pink. Okay? You got 490. That's your basic unit of time. If it's met by somebody maturing, then there still has to be a mass vote by believers, not unbelievers. Okay? And if that mass vote is enough, and it only needs to be one, then the person who matured back here, the time grant that he won, because God super matured him, gets to play. And that totals 1,050 years, with 50 being considered the Jubilee period for the Gentiles, so it's like playing in, like in here. All right. The Jews know that today as 1,000. They don't understand, they forgot the meaning of this 50 here. Okay? They forgot that. So that's our basic time unit. That's what we're going to be talking about in the next segment. Okay, this is where we left off. Now, what I need to show you first is what happens if this doesn't occur. In other words, what if nobody matured here? Okay, well then all this can't happen. This whole thing is just like nothing. The bridge is out. There's no time that can be granted to vote because somebody didn't mature here. So guess what? Time ends. That's the problem. There has to be a granting of time to somebody in order for this segment to even occur. And if there is nobody, then all this is wiped out. That's the big point Paul's going to be using as his jumping off point in Ephesians, is that the bridge of time is out because Israel voted against Messiah. And that's why church exists. That's his main point. And this is what all the preterists don't understand. Okay? I mean, they know Israel voted against Christ, but they do not understand its relationship to the grant of time because they don't even know this doctrine. They don't know the doctrine because they didn't consult the Jews. Who do know this doctrine, they just know it in a garbled format, that's all. They just got the numbers wrong. They understand the right idea. Of course, they don't believe in Messiah, so they don't understand what, is really going on with them. But they do understand that there's a time grant, that it's contingent. So if there's no 490, then there's no 70, and the next 490 can't play, so there's no 1050 either. You got that? So now we're going to look at it from the time of, Adam. Okay, so now we're going to start again, only we're going to look at it the way Adam saw it, okay? Because Adam understood it differently. Not much differently, however. Here's the first 490 in history. Alright? And Adam happened to be the guy that super matured in time. I'm not going to go into detail on that. You can see my Yapping Part 10. And you can see my How God Constructs Time playlist if you want to know the details that, about Adam, etc. Okay, he knew that. And he voted. So the 70-year time period, therefore, could play. Alright, that's what this really is. And because he voted in the 70-year time period, there were believers, that's the Genesis 5 roster, who believed, then the other 490 could be granted. And there were more maturations during that time. However, this was Gentiles, okay? The same structure that you see here exists. It is still 1050. All right, but from the perspective of all those who didn't believe, okay, it's got a different meaning. So it's kind of like piggybacked onto this real structure, which is the believer structure. This is promise time, okay? This is the promise time structure. This is how the Jews call this promise time today, Seder Olam Rabbah. This is why their calendar is off, because they mixed up their promise time with real time. So they don't know where they are in the prophetic calendar. Okay? This is promise time. This is the way you account promise time. This is the way Moses accounts it. This is the way Isaiah 53 accounts it. And this is the way Paul will account it in Ephesians 1. Promise time goes by sevens. 7 means promise. The Hebrew word is Sheba, or Sheba. You say it in different ways, okay? And it means promise. It means 7, it means promise, it means rest. That's why the week is designed in 7 days. It's a synonym for promise. So when you see Bible accounting in terms of sevens, it's really telling you about how promise time is fulfilled. And that's exactly why Moses uses sevens as the basis for his meter in Psalm 90, and why Isaiah uses it in Isaiah 53, and why Paul uses it in Ephesians 1. They're trying to explain that. Okay, but from the unbeliever perspective, it's not configured that way. It's the same unit. From the unbeliever perspective, this is 1,000. Okay, it's a civilization unit. And this is 50. In the Mosaic Law, again, this is called Jubilee. The idea is that civilization, including unbelievers, has 1,000 years allotted to it for the sake of the promised time playing out here. Okay? The promised time is playing out to harvest believers. The unbelievers get to live anyway, even if they don't believe. They get to have life. God sustains them. He gives them, food and shelter and clothing and weather and all the other things that they need. Ideally, so they'll wake up and smell the coffee. But even if they don't, He gives it to them. But in the last 50 years, there's a concentrated evangelism that goes on to harvest them. I mean, it's going on the whole 1,000 here too. But it's very concentrated here because this time unit is about to end, and there have to be enough unbelievers voting, or you got a flood. This is the basis for the flood in Genesis 6, is that there weren't enough votes at the end of the first 1050 of history. So in the year 1656 from Adam, which is our 2450 BC, the flood had to happen, because there weren't enough, the votes here didn't happen. So everybody got wiped out. The purpose of this 50 years was not accepted by people. They didn't respond. So that's why you have only Noah and the 8. Noah and the 7 others. Okay? So that's what that 1050 means with respect to unbelievers. And notice how it's piggybacked onto, and it has the same value as down in here, promise time. Okay? This is promise time. And it's playing for the believers, and piggybacked on top of it is civilization for unbelievers too. Okay? And if that time isn't met, then the whole human race, or just those who rejected, as in the flood, dies. We're still subject to those same rules. God set up those rules with Adam. They didn't change. And that's what Paul is referring to in Ephesians 1, just like Moses did in Psalm 90. So here's the 1,000. Now we're going to recap. For the unbeliever, it's 1,050. The objective is for the unbeliever to believe. That's what he's voting on. I'm sorry, I can't draw this very well. Will the unbeliever believe like Abraham did? Like Abraham did in Genesis 15:6, same pattern. Always it's the same issue in every time period. Do you believe in Christ as he's then revealed? If so, you're considered to be harvested, and then, of course, you're in this unit here. You're subject to promise time at that point. And then here, it's a concentrated harvesting. I'll just say H for harvest because I can't draw well. Okay? And if you don't do that, if people don't respond, they get wiped out, just like the flood. All right? So notice how you can, this meaning of the 1050, of the 1,000, can cause everybody to be wiped out, but the believers are saved. That's why in the flood, Noah and his family were saved. They were saved out of the disaster that happened on earth due to all the rejection by the unbelievers. That's what the flood tells you about. It is a trend of history. It's not just that event. It's a complete trend of history. It's still going on now, and in fact, we're in a flood period. We're in a voting period. That's why you see so much opposition to the Bible. That's its characteristic of a flood period. Okay, it's a scheduled thing. It ends in 2130 for us. It began in March of 2010. Okay? So the question is, what side of history are you going to be on? Are you going to be on this side of history? Or are you going to be on this side and get wiped out by 2130? Of course, we're all going to die before 2130, those of us alive now. But the point is that how are you going to live? How are you going to die now? Because you're in that period. So it's a big issue. And of course, if there aren't enough believers, then time ends anyhow. All right, so that's the next part of this segment. Now we're going to get into the panorama of these 1050s and how they play.